I See Glutamates, an editorial by Robin Hood, Part 2. Throughout the mid-1990s, I was overweight by a good 70 or 80 pounds. And like most of us have been told, I was eating the quote, good foods recommended by the FDA, and I exercised nearly 5 times a week. On typical aerobic workout days, I would work out for about an hour and burn somewhere between 500 and 800 calories. I also included anaerobic workouts into my weekly routines. I would usually focus on two body parts for the day, such as biceps and back, or triceps and chest. I'd always give my muscles a break after working out as well and have several off days in between. And for several years during the late 1990s, a good friend of mine was also a personal trainer. Even though we worked out consistently for over 2 years together, he lost weight and I didn't. Of course, as a trainer, he was pretty baffled by this. No matter what I did and how well I monitored my food and my exercise, a few pounds lost one month would be gained back the next. The people in my life that know me know I'm a very disciplined person. As a scientific person, I counted calories, and it didn't add up as to why it was so dang hard for me to lose fat. During the 1990s, I varied in weight between 240 and 280 pounds. But something happened in the summer of 1994. I took a trip to Finland. I stayed in Finland for almost 3 months. While I was there, I had eaten many new and different foods, but was consuming more or less the same calories and exercising about the same as well. By the time I returned to the States, I was shocked to discover I had dropped from 265 pounds down to 218. I knew I had lost some weight in Finland, but hadn't imagined that much. As you can imagine, I was very excited about my weight loss, so I continued my exercise and eating habits. But as you know where this is going, it only took about 3 months again before I had put back on another 30 pounds or so. At that time, I was completely puzzled why I couldn't continue the progress. Now warp 5 years into the future to 1999. One of the sparks that hit my central vision expanded out like the size of a quarter about a foot away from the eye, and would not go away. This spot I saw looked a little different than the flashing sparks I had previously seen. I remember laying down my head backward waiting for it to go away, but being on the job, I felt compelled to keep working. After shutting my right eye, I realized a good 10% of my vision was blocked. A greenish shimmer around the edges made it look jagged, though it was generally circular in shape. Going to sleep that night was a hard thing to do. Why was that spark hanging around? I figured I'd wake up the next morning and it would be gone. But of course the opposite happened. I realized the blind spot had grown a little bit larger. Then I discovered another problem. You see, when you have a major spot in your central vision and attempt to read something up close, the eyes just don't focus well and you get a nice splitting headache. And not a headache that goes away, a headache that's there all the time. I scheduled an appointment with my ophthalmologist once again to get my retina examined. After the examination, the verdict came in. He told me that I had a retinal leakage. He asked me if I had any great visual stress, like staring at a computer for too long. Although my work involves using computers, I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. The good news was that he told me my retina was in great shape, although one of the capillaries had burst somehow. And now that capillary was seeping blood into the gel part of my eye. The blood that had leaked into the gel part of my eye had dried there. I was looking through this dried blood, acting as the blind spot. The ophthalmologist said that there was about a 50-50 chance that the body would reabsorb the blood from the gel part of the eye and reduce the blind spot, or get rid of it entirely. But he also gave a second option of laser surgery to remove the blood in case it didn't go away on its own. 4 months later, after constant headaches, more spots that occurred and would sometimes last days before disappearing, and a great fear that I was going blind, the main blind spot started disappearing at the edges. Trust me when I say that when anyone is faced with blindness, you will do anything it takes to remove the source of the problem and be as aware as possible to what might be the cause. Being scientifically minded, I systematically eliminated each type of food one by one and slowly added back only the foods that didn't cause a reaction. And of course the reaction I'm talking about is seeing the spots in my central vision. This systematic approach seemed to work well with certain foods, but I found other foods were more complex or had mixed ingredients might cause a spark or two still. Over a few months, I had eliminated most of the foods that obviously caused a good chunk of the visual distortions. I also started taking lutein and zeaxanthin for my visual health, and had lost some of the weight to boot somehow. However, I could not get the sparks to disappear entirely for some reason. Exercising often made the sparks worse because of the added pressure to the blood vessels, as I discovered later. Even though I had removed the major culprits that caused most of the blood pressure swings, a few meals here and there would make the sparks appear, and fear would often set in until they went away, in thinking that a new blind spot was forming. But living with the fear was fine because I knew I was systematically making strides. Ultimately, I figured out the greatest cause to my visual sparks were the following: bagels, many types of breads, soy foods like soy nut butter, most cereals and grains, whey powder for muscle building, kung pao chicken in most Chinese meals, most soups, certain salad dressings, many types of drinks including some energy drinks, and many frozen coffee drinks and cheeses. I realized that eating out at all would probably cause problems with my vision. For some reason I noticed bagels were the worst. They would allow me to see sparks within 10 minutes. Sometimes the sparks would last for hours afterward. Since I was exercising, I also noticed that after about 30 minutes of running aerobically, I would see a halo-like shape in my vision for a good 10 minutes before it would go away. But the great news to share is because of this systematic approach I took, the sparks and flashes slowly subsided and went away over the course of about 4 to 5 months. Even the halos I used to get when running wouldn't appear now. I'm taking a leap here, but I believe no one wants an eyeball to explode with pressure, right? So I started the process of fact-finding. It turns out that the buildup of glutamates in the retina is a real, testable thing that has already been done. The scientific term is called elevated intraocular pressure, or IOP for short. Scientific studies have found that when there is a higher concentration of glutamates in the retinal tissue, the pressure increases. I really wish I had known that there was a high glutamate buildup in my body over a decade ago. And my hypothesis, I believe I hit my threshold and was pushing it on a daily basis. My analysis pointed me to the conclusion that some compounds may harm us over a period of time or in too much concentration. Literally, having too much of a compound may act as a poison, or not having enough of a compound could lead to a deficiency. We rarely think about taking precautions against the slow poisons because the body has many systems to compensate for the consumption of things both good and bad. So, of course, I started looking broader at the cause. It's my opinion that the American public is eating a highly manipulative entree on a regular basis in the 21st century. Sadly, I've learned in my findings, glutamates have become very widespread, and people are extremely uninformed. I've actually come across some weird and crazy findings as well. Some of our fruits have even been sprayed down with glutamates to help protect against insects and to preserve the fruit longer. In a sense, we are modern-day glutamate guinea pigs. And what's interesting about glutamic acid is that it is a very powerful flavor enhancer. So if you were a food designer, wouldn't you want to make the most flavorful food possible? But would you knowingly eat a poison? I say doubtfully. What if I told you the poison could make the surrounding sludge of bland flavors taste wonderful? Now, what if I also told you that glutamic acid bonds very tightly to the receptors in your brain, so much that it can be addictive? Well, now I've told you this, I've still failed to mention one last thing. Now, what if I told you this flavor enhancer is also the same thing that powers the neurotransmitters in your brain? But then what happens when glutamates get in higher concentration? Well, my findings point to the blowing open of the neurotransmitters, kind of like having spark plugs on high-octane gas. Seriously, I'd just like to remind you again, I would have rather fallen off a ladder from 2 stories high than have gone blind in an eye for 4 months. But because of the discoveries of what foods cause my eye sparks, I unknowingly removed the buildup of glutamates from my body. A year later, after my blind spot had occurred, I no longer saw flashes. I was cured. but only as long as I continued to eliminate the culprit foods.